I don't remember much from my childhood. I lived in a small town south of Krakow with my mom, dad, and 2 sisters. Those early days are a blur, but I remember going door to door around the neighborhood, asking for treats during the Didnt Harvest Festival. It was a tradition of ours since we knew the neighbors always bought too much candy. We would gather leftovers and make a feast of our own. At every door, you were greeted with a cheeky smile as the neighbors lovingly cussed out the scoundrel children of the Dabrowski home. Of course, happy memories are happy for a reason, because things get worse and you get something to compare them to. My parents separated. My mother moved to Warszawa, where we could be closer to my grandparents and uncles. Meanwhile, my father, Jaromir, did his best to stay in our lives, but it got harder and harder. He needed to work longer and longer hours, but he still sent us money every month. He wanted us to have a beautiful life, even if he couldn't be there for it. With every passing year, those visits grew further and further away. First, we lost Easter, and then Christmas, and then the birthdays. And finally, our yearly Didnt festival meetup. And last that we heard of him, he was barely making ends meet. He wasn't sending money anymore, and over time, he disappeared into memory. My mother remarried and my sisters graduated. My older sister moved to Ljubljana while my younger went to Munich. My mother stayed in Warszawa with her new husband, but once the kids were out of the picture, she moved into her summer home up north. I love my mother dearly, but she's always had an eye for the luxurious, always planning the next trip, the next sun-baked afternoon. I stayed in Warszawa. I got myself a degree in sociology and managed to hold on to a low-ranking government job overseeing private claims. It wasn't glamorous, it was mostly being yelled at in different ways, but it paid the bills. A mind-numbing battle of making decisions, defending them, and then making them again. The year I turned 24, I got a letter from an estate lawyer. Turns out my father had passed away. This wasn't recent. According to the papers, he had passed away several years ago. Some kind of accident with farm equipment. He didn't have a proper will, and dividing the estate among his living descendants hadn't been a state priority. It got lost in a folder somewhere, and now it had floated back up. They had divided everything equally between me and my sisters. My youngest sister got his savings. My oldest got his car and valuables, and I got the house. I called the others to check who wanted to go see his grave, and nobody wanted to. They were all tangled up with their own lives and their troubles. My family were under the impression that my father had abandoned us, and this was a way for us to abandon him back. I had a different impression. I always thought that he was just working too hard. I decided I would take some time off work to collect his things and check out the property, trying to get a better idea of why he had distanced himself from us, and maybe I could get a better picture of my early life, that time where I was greeted with a smile rather than a complaint. It was a long drive. The roads out there aren't the best. It's a very small community with no more than about 250 people, most of which are wheat farmers, and there's not that much to do. There are only 2 things other than farms, a church and a store. Everything else is either too far away or too irrelevant. And going past the endless fields, I got so lulled into a rhythm that I almost missed the exit. It's so small that you can accidentally pass it by if you don't take the right turn. There are no signs. You can only recognize it from the church in the distance. I took a left turn and prayed to God the suspension would hold a little bit longer. I decided to pay the old church a visit. We had spent a lot of time there. There was plenty of parking. It was smaller than I remembered, but then again, everything looked bigger back then. There's something uneasy about coming home after so long. As I stepped out of the car, it all just came back to me. The smells, the sounds. Even if you can't put your finger on it, there's something that tickles the mind as if to remind you, this is where you belong. "Welcome," a voice called out. "Sorry about the state of things." I turned around to see a man a couple of years older than myself. He had well-combed hair and thick glasses. He was wearing a priest's garb. I had almost forgot. The village priest had been old even back when I was young. No wonder there was a new one. "I'm Father Cherniak," he continued. "Are you new in town or passing through?" "I grew up here," I said. "I'm one of the Dabrowski kids." "Sorry, I'm not familiar," he smiled. "I only came here last winter to pick up the work from Father Golick." "He lived until last winter," I asked. "Are you sure?" "Quite so," he laughed. 101 years old. "Wow, I can't believe it," I smiled. "God really does have a sense of humor." Father Cherniak showed me around. He told me his plans for refurbishing the windows, but the one thing that irked him more than anything was the doors. You see, they were gone. The church was wide open. "It's a local superstition," he sighed. "A shepherd needs his gate to tend his flock. But every time I put the doors up, somebody takes them down." "Strange," I said. "I've never heard of that before." "Really, I thought you were from the area." "Guess I've been gone too long, Father." The church looked naked in a way. No barriers. I could see the gravel that they had dragged in, forgetting to wipe their feet. Father Cherniak had tried to put up some curtains, but the wind had torn them down piece by piece. Before I left, he showed me my father's grave. It had been vandalized. The headstone had tipped over and there were no flowers. I promised myself to make it a little nicer before I left, but I didn't understand. Sure, my family wasn't perfect, but we had never been hated. This grave looked outright despised. I thanked Father Cherniak and made my way across town. I wasn't prepared for what I saw. All through town, there were these wide open houses just like the church. At first, I thought it was some kind of summer cleaning going on, but no, all doors were gone. They weren't just wide open, they were removed. I could see all the way into people's living rooms. The hustle and bustle as homeowners moved from kitchen to bedroom, talking amongst themselves. I slowed down and looked a little closer. Not a single room had a door, not even the bathrooms. A couple of them had curtains or insect nets put up, but no doors. House after house, completely open to the elements. A couple of them had welcome mats by the windows in their living rooms, as if to show if that was the way to enter. A couple of them had completely bricked their entrances where their front doors used to be, sealing it. Sure, small towns can get a bit quirky, but I had never seen anything like this. I pulled up to an all too familiar driveway and I gasped. I couldn't even recognize my home. It had been vandalized, every window broken, every door removed. I could see rats scurrying around. Walking around the property, things got even worse. There had been a small fire in the backyard, spreading to the outer wall of the kitchen. It wasn't completely burned down, but you could probably punch straight through with little effort. And finally, on the far side, neon green spray paint reading, Sin Diabla, Son of the Devil. I couldn't believe it. They'd even clipped the chains off our swing set, leaving a rusted metal skeleton. It looked like somebody had tried to start a tire fire but couldn't quite get it going. I had a hard time even picturing what it used to look like. There was this bottomless hole forming in my stomach where every smile I remembered seemed like a cruel taunt. Something must have happened, something that I had never heard of. Coming back around, I noticed a crowd of middle-aged men. They were standing just outside of the property looking over my car. I didn't recognize any of them. "You at the bank?" one of them asked. "No, I'm the Dabrowski kid," I said. "The son." "You're the son?" he spat. "You want to join him in hell, is that it?" "You know who did this?" I snapped back, pointing at the house. "Was it you?" "Could have been anyone," a man in the back added. One of them gave me a knowing smile and nodded at the graffiti. They whispered something among themselves, letting out a chuckle under their breaths. They scoffed at me and wandered off, spitting curses and sneers. Not quite the welcome I had imagined. I had initially planned on sleeping in the old house, but there was no way. Not only was it wide open, but it was a disgusting mess. I'm not going to go into detail about what they had done to the place, but I'd be lucky if I was able to give it away in its current state. I decided to spend the night sleeping in my car. I leaned the seat back and wrapped myself in a blanket, hoping that it wouldn't get too cold. I spent some time on my phone, but I didn't want to use up all of the battery. But somehow I still ended up staying awake long past midnight. But there was something beautiful about that night. The sunset was one of the few things that didn't change around those parts. Watching the sun go down over the same old fields gave me that feeling that some things never change. I remember waking up sometime around 2 a.m., seemingly for no reason. It wasn't cold and there was no one bothering me and no notifications on my phone. A careful wind brushed against the hood of my car. I laid there for a moment, trying to ignore the texture of the seat sinking into my sweaty skin. I filtered out the sounds of nature bleeding in from outside. A distant part of me had heard them all before. I listened past the songbirds and the insects in the fields, and beyond that, there was something else, something in the distance. A wail, a deep, sorrowful wail. The following day, I took some time to walk around town. The rumor that Jeremir's kid was back had spread like wildfire. I could tell by the sideways looks as people passed me on the street. The only ones who didn't seem to care were the kids, and they were few and far between. At the far end of the town, there was this long brick wall. It wasn't very high, but it was dense. It had doors built directly into it. Dozens of them, every door from every house in the neighborhood. They had jammed them all straight into the brick. I couldn't see ours though. It had an eerie look to it. Maybe 100 or more doors all built to never be opened. I couldn't help but touch a few handles, making sure they didn't budge. There were a couple of teenage kids standing at the edge of the wall observing me. I walked up to them, surprised to see that they didn't back down. They had a cocky look to them, but at least they weren't openly hostile. Before I could say anything, they turned to me. "My mom hates you," one of them said. "What did you do?" "I used to live around here," I said. "Came to get some things." "Why'd you come back?" he scoffed. "I'm leaving the moment that I can afford it." "Same," said the other, rolling an unlit cigarette between his fingers. I gave them a tired look. A man passed us further down the street, throwing daggers at me with his eyes. Talking to the wrong person would get my teeth knocked out for sure. I turned to the kids, lowering my voice. "I'm Dabrowski's son," I admitted. "That's why they hate me." The second kid nearly dropped his cigarette. I managed to bribe them into a conversation with the promise of a six-pack from the next town over. In return, they would give me the unofficial tour of what had happened these past few years. A fair trade, I suppose. I'd apparently missed quite a lot. We wandered to the east side of town. There was an old farm that had stood there for ages. It didn't really have a name. It had just been a part of the background. It was barely even a frame anymore, just the outline of what had once been a home. It had started years ago. People heard knocking coming from that ruin. It used to have this door that still stood, clinging to the edge of a rotted outdoor frame. You could hear it at night, one of the kids explained. Knock knock, like a door to hell. Sounds awful, I said. Oh, not to everyone, the other kid sighed. There was one guy who liked it. It wasn't a hard guess as to whom that might have been. Rumor was my dad had gone up there one night and opened the door. It had crumbled off the hinges and according to the townsfolk, something had stepped through. Some called it the devil. A couple of kids thought that it was an alien. Most of the locals just called it slepik. It came through when the door broke, the first kid said, and now it can't go back. So you're saying that it's still here? I asked. It's real. Well, yeah, he laughed. Why do you think this place is so messed up? Well, then what's with the doors? It's looking for a way back to hell, he said. And when it can't find the right door, it gets angry, and then it hurts people. Slepik, that's what they called it. An ugly word for a blind man or a mole. They liked to call it that because of its terrible vision, mistaking every door for the one that it was looking for. For years, Slepik had moved from house to house, knocking on every door that it could find. And if somebody opened, it would do something terrible. People had gone missing and a couple had died. I drove my adolescent guides to the other town over to get them their promised beer. They told me all they could as we went. It felt a bit weird driving off with a couple of teenagers, but I got the impression that these two had done far worse for far less. Delinquents, but honest ones at that. At first, people had hidden in their homes, but then Slepnik had knocked until the doors broke. Then it would knock on the inner doors, and so over time people removed them. Those who didn't would get a visit at some point. With all the discarded doors, they built the brick wall, tricking Slepnik into knocking around at night. This can't be true, I said. It's absurd. It's true, the first kid said. That's why they hate your dumb dad. He let him in. But it doesn't make sense. Why don't you just pack up and leave? I'm gonna, the first kid said. I told you that. The second kid pondered the question for a while and then shrugged at his friend. He answered as if he had thought about it 100 times. Everywhere is good, but home is best. Of course he would say that. Come hell or high water, home is home. I got them their 6-pack and some fast food. I got some for myself while I was at it. It wasn't a long drive all in all, but long enough to be a bother. By the time that we got back, it was almost dark. They rushed out of the car waving a hasty goodbye. As they did, the second kid called back to me. Go see for yourself, he said. Slepnik comes out at night. He pointed down the street towards the brick wall. I nodded at them in silent thanks. I didn't believe them. I had to see this for myself. If what I had heard the previous night was any indication, Slepnik would be out somewhere after midnight, and so I went to bed early. And when I say bed, I mean sleeping in my car for the second night in a row. I was miserable. I considered leaving first thing in the morning, but there was this deep sadness in me that I couldn't shake. This was my old home. I had played in these fields. It felt wrong knowing that I was no longer welcome. My dad was many things, but no devil's son. If he opened that door, it must have been for a good reason. And if he had let through something that shouldn't be here, it must have been an honest mistake. He was not an evil man, but he was fallible. Then again, maybe he didn't have a choice. Maybe Slepnik didn't give him a choice either. I must have nodded off at some point. I forgot to set an alarm, but I still woke up at 2:30 a.m. I considered going back to sleep, but I decided to have one last look around town. I had promised myself I would, so I got out of the car, stretched, and listened. It was easier that night. There was a noise that cut straight through the ambience. That wailing. It was clearer. Even in the dark, I could tell where it came from. The houses had turned off their lights, leaving the streets lit up with nothing but the moon. Still, I knew those streets. I could follow them in my sleep. I made my way to a dirt path, leading me past the 2 houses at the edge of town and straight to the brick wall. At that point, I could hear it as clear as day. It was a man wailing at the top of his lungs, crying his soul out, bawling like a child. I could see the brick wall in the distance. A sharp contour of the bricked-in doors stood out against the moonlight like a long, flat, abstract painting. And in the middle of it all, there was a dark silhouette. It looked like a man, sort of. I couldn't really tell what he was like. He had a bulky jacket on. He was pulling on one of the doors and smacking it over and over with a closed fist. It was the same pattern over and over. Pull, smack, smack. Pull, smack, smack. And in between every attempt, he jerked his head around, crying desperately. I considered walking up to him. This wasn't some kind of devil, this was a heartbroken man. As I took a few steps closer, I noticed something in the corner of my eye. A light. I turned around only to notice a small flashlight coming from one of the nearby houses. They were filming me with their phones. Looking closer, I could see two little heads peeking out, shaking their heads in a certain no. Turning back to the brick wall, I heard a sudden crack. The man had pulled one of the doors straight out of the wall. It came loose and he set it down next to him, and with one hand pushed it downward. He didn't even have a good grip, but with a single hand, he broke the door into pieces. The wailing turned into a scream. Rage, unfiltered, unhindered rage. With only his fingers, he began to rip bricks straight out of the wall, tossing them around like leaves in the wind. I could hear them landing around me, kicking up tufts of grass. I backed away as the lights in the house went out. The little heads dipped away from the window. I hurried down the dirt path as I watched Slepnik climb on top of the brick wall, screaming at the top of his lungs. Even at a distance, I could tell that something was off. His proportions seemed wrong. It was hard to tell. He had wrapped himself in some kind of dark fabric, but something about him didn't look right. I didn't stop to stare. Say what you will, maybe it was just a strange man. Either way, I was looking at something dangerous. And when the locals turn to hide, you do best to follow suit. So I hurried down the dirt path, hearing his terrifying scream echo across the fields. I barely slept that night. It's one thing to believe in monsters and another thing to see them. As soon as the sun rose, I drove off. But as I went past the church, I noticed something. There was a white van outside and one of the church doors had been put back up. There were two men on ladders getting ready to put the other door up, and it was hidden under a tarp just off to the side. I could see Father Cherniak up front with a big smile on his face. I decided to see what was going on. Surely he had to know what he was doing. The moment I parked my car, Father Cherniak waved me over. He was right next to me before my boots hit the gravel. "Welcome back," he smiled. "Glad to see you haven't left us yet." I closed the car door and yawned a little bit. "What are you doing?" I asked. "What is this?" "You inspired me. For an outsider, this place had to have looked awful. I saw it, you know. I saw it in your face." He turned back to the church as the two carpenters began tipping up the second door. "It must be dignified," he continued. "Our Lady deserves better, don't you think?" "This is a bad idea," I said. "I've seen that thing around town." Father Cherniak shook his head and put a hand on my shoulder. This was a man who was trained to talk to people, and I could tell. "If the Lord's house can't shelter you from the devil, then what can?" In exchange for a little manual labor, I was offered a hot shower and a proper meal. After sleeping in my car for a couple of days, I couldn't say no to that. Smooth talker or not, Father Cherniak seemed an honest man. He believed what he spoke of. As the hours passed, more and more people dropped by, mostly townsfolk coming by to cuss him out for being an idiot. Some of them threw rocks at the door demanding that he take them down. Others in turn thought that it was about time that somebody at the church had some balls. Just like Father Cherniak had said, if the house of the Lord can't shelter you from evil, then what can? By late afternoon, there was a significant gathering of people. Even those who had acted in anger earlier in the day were swayed. The argument was simple. Do they not trust in God? There was a bit of a cookout. Some brought sausages or steak for dinner. I spotted the 2 teenagers in the crowd stealing a bit of wine from one of the elderly. I lost track of time. It felt a bit like the Harvest Festival back in the day, something that drew the town out of hiding. The sounds and smells were the same, and I could see from the smiles in the crowd that I wasn't the only one feeling that way. Later in the day, Father Cherniak held a sermon. I don't remember much of it. I was having trouble staying awake. That, if anything, felt just like when I was a kid. It's amazing how something as stiff as church pews can be so lulling, but there was one part that stuck with me. The door is a threshold, he said, and the door of a church is the threshold between the vile and the sacred, between sin and saint. We can no longer live in uncertainty. We must live as we teach, and we are proud to say that we have been taught well. The sermon continued into the evening. It ended just after sunset. Some people wandered home, but others were ashamed to stay. It was no longer just a public gathering, it had turned into a challenge. The faith of the congregation pitted against the devil itself. Some went home to gather blankets and pillows, laying down to sleep on the floor. This wasn't easy for them. Some talked about the people who had disappeared over the years, people who had opened the door when Slepnik first came to knock. An elderly woman had gotten her neck broken. One man had been dragged out into the yard and hung from a tree. Another man had been mutilated. "It pulled his arm right out of the socket," they whispered. "We found it across the street." I tried talking to people, but it was clear that nobody wanted anything to do with me. I was still Jaramir's boy. The only ones who didn't seem to mind were the 2 teenagers that I had talked to earlier. Later that evening, they walked up to me, probably just to piss off their parents. "Aren't you scared?" one of them asked. "Should I be?" "It's got a bloodied tooth for you," the other said. "I don't think so," I smiled. "I've only seen it once." "Yeah, but..." They quieted down, looking at one another and then back at me. I was missing something. "Your dad," they said. "Slepnik got him. Did no one tell you?" They hadn't. Turns out it wasn't malfunctioning farm equipment that had killed him years ago. It was Slepnik. My dad had been the first victim on the list. Most of the villagers had considered this a sinner getting his just reward. Others figured that if you play stupid games, you win stupid prizes. They had found him tangled in the swing set, his body broken and mangled. The kids left me alone with my thoughts for a while. They could tell that I wasn't all there. It was one thing to have him dead, but to die in such a horrifying way was unthinkable. I could barely picture him in my mind, and now there was a new image vying for my attention. Rattling chains, dripping blood. But there wasn't much time to think. As the clock passed midnight, someone came knocking. The church fell silent. Something pulled on the handles, 2 smacks, a pull on the handle again. These doors were massive and the hinges had just been reinforced, but I could still see them struggle. Father Cherniak took a deep breath. As the congregation fell silent, he spoke aloud. "This is no place for sons of sin," he said. "There is nothing for you to corrupt." It all stopped. We all breathed a sigh of relief, but the 2 teenagers didn't look too convinced. They had huddled up on the far side of the church. There was an emergency exit in one of the side rooms. The door moved again, this time with more determination. The handles were pulled even harder, and the smacking made the entire slab of wood crackle like a sinking ship. And then the wailing, the loud and desperate wailing. As soon as I heard it, I could see the color drain from the congregation's faces. The door was pulled back and forth, back and forth. A chandelier started to shake. "The door is coming down," somebody called out. "It's coming down now." Father Cherniak tried to calm them, but it was too late. People flooded the rear exit of the church trying to get away. I was pushed aside without much thought. If the Dabrowski kid bit the bullet, all the better as far as these people were concerned. "There is no sin in the house of the Lord," Father Cherniak yelled. "There is no sin. The devil can laugh and jeer as much as he likes, but there is no place for his evil." But thoughtful words can't stop a broken door. Slepnik wasn't deterred. The doors came down, and there was a pause in the air as they fell. The air swept through the room, blowing out most of the candles along the pews. As the doors hit the ground, the crowd panicked. Most of them were already on their way out. People screamed, others cursed. I was in the far back of the crowd, and it was clear that I was never going to make it out without being crushed. I settled instead for hiding among the front pews, hoping that the darkness would shield me. I could barely see Slepnik in the flickering candlelight. His right arm had grown out of his shoulder blade, and his left arm was so long that it scraped against the floor. He had a sort of hunchback pose, but there was something that kept moving on his back, fluttering like a shivering membrane. He wasn't wearing a coat, he just wasn't human. He looked like something vaguely trying to resemble a human. Even Father Cherniak ran, hiding behind the altar. Slepnik rushed through the room in a messy gallop, knocking over pews as he went. They didn't even slow him down. When he got to the side room, people had already run screaming out into the night. Slepnik couldn't catch them. Instead, he settled on throwing things across the room, tearing down whatever he could reach, and breaking whatever he could lay his hands on. His wailing had turned to rage, and he was out of control. I was laying flat on my stomach, crawling away. Father Cherniak wasn't so lucky. Just like Slepnik had done with the brick wall, he climbed up on the altar, and from there he could see the priest. I don't like to recall what I saw. It's unworthy to make a spectacle of tragedy. But Slepnik didn't care for titles or words. He didn't care about anything. He picked Father up with a single arm, holding him outstretched in front of him like a child considering an unfamiliar vegetable. Father Cherniak tried his best. In between desperate cries, he said the most powerful words that he knew. He compelled, he demanded, and when nothing seemed to work, he begged and prayed. And then Slepnik unhinged his jaw like a snake. The screaming stopped with a snap as a spray of blood shot out. Something thumped against the altar and rolled onto the wooden floor. A pair of glasses clattered against the ground. Slepnik spat and coughed, picking tufts of hair from his teeth. He let the body slip from his grip, drooping unceremoniously to the red carpet. I remember crawling. I crawled as quietly and carefully as I could. Speknik was big, but his footsteps were light, like he was tiptoeing everywhere that he went. I didn't notice that he was behind me until his shadow drowned me. I rolled around only to see his vast shape towering over me. He must have seen me. There was still a couple of candles. For a moment I saw his face, a half-made gray thing with black, inward-leaning concave eyes, a faint shimmer like scales from a fish, a human mouth with an extra mandible, a twitching nose adjusting to the smell of burnt wax and blood. Viscera still dripped from his strange lips. And then he grabbed me, carefully, slowly. I closed my eyes as I was pulled in closer. He looked at me. He looked close. I could feel the heat of his mouth. Perhaps I would be tastier. And then he made a noise. I can't put my finger on what kind of noise it was, but I had never heard it before. A squeal, perhaps. A confused rattle. He put me back down. I opened my eyes as those large black eyes turned away from me. He was leaving. His rage subsided. As he dragged his long arm across the floor, his wailing bubbled back up. But it wasn't as desperate. It was confused. The effects of the attack was immediate. Some went to get their hunting gear, others were blaming the priest, saying that he wasn't holy enough. Others were leaving town entirely. After all, if God couldn't save them, they had to save themselves. I made my way back to my father's home. There was so much that he had never told me, and it was too late to ask. I had no idea what kind of mess he had been wrapped up in, but I couldn't stand by and wait for it to blow over. If this was his fault, if all of this was his fault, I would gladly join the others to spit at his name. But I couldn't do it without knowing for sure. I had to be sure. I went room by room, pulling out drawers and kicking over boxes. I threw around moth-eaten clothes, I tipped the bed. I dragged down the wardrobe, crashing it onto the wooden floor, hoping that I could find something, anything to answer my questions. Finally, I ran out into the backyard. I saw the stains on the swing set. I remember him pushing me on it, making the chains creak as I went higher and higher. But now that noise meant something else. Something dark. An image of a broken man wrapped in a forgotten toy. I don't know how long I went berserk on that house, but I remember finally just taking a swing at it. As I mentioned, a part of the kitchen had burned. You could punch right through it. So I did. Turns out, there is a secret panel beneath the kitchen sink. I didn't register it at first. I just thought that I had hit a second, harder wall. But as I calmed down and looked a little bit closer, I realized it was a small compartment under the sink. I had punched right through from the outside. I sat down flat on the wet grass, feeling it soaking into my jeans as I dug around. There was a box. Most of it was tainted by rats, part of it was burned, but there were little bits and bobs that I could make sense of. The family albums, mostly pictures of me and my sisters, friends from around the village. A picture of Dad next to his first car, pictures from our Facebook printed and framed. The kind of things that one would like to keep. But then the picture stopped. No more dates, no more birthdays, nothing. But I kept turning the pages, and in the back there was something else. Other pictures, notes. Pictures of a door with a text written on the back. It's not screaming, it's crying. Little notes on the margin, saying that it was afraid, it was lost, that no one listened and that no one cared. There were no more pictures, but there were notes. He had to get out, wants to stay. He hunts elk in the forest and brings it to me. There's nothing left of him, I understand. It told a story of my father trying to help something that didn't belong, something from another place. They shared meals and kindness, trying their best to find common ground. This had seemingly gone on for months. It spoke of spring and later winter. I will let him sleep in the house, the final note said. Maybe it can help his night terrors. Something must have happened. A dangerous creature like that inside a small house. Maybe there was an accident, a misunderstanding. Maybe it strung him up by the chains to make him look alive, like a puppet. Either way, I was close to an answer. Maybe I was looking more like my father than I had realized. Looking back at it, I felt like a sleepwalker. I wasn't thinking clearly. Maybe it was the adrenaline. I walked around in a daze, making my way back into town. It was quieter now, many had rushed to their cars. I followed the dirt road back to the brick wall and I found him, Slepnik, wailing weakly, tapping against the bricked-in doors, pulling a little on a handle, hoping against hope that something would happen. He wasn't angry when I approached, he was confused. I had to make him understand, to see the truth of things. So, despite everything that I had seen and everything that I heard, I decided to trust my instinct. My father had made many mistakes, but he was no fool. His mistakes were honest. So if this was a mistake, I prayed to God it would be an honest one. "Follow me," I said. "This way." Slepnik had featherlight steps. I could still hear commotion around town, but it was all swallowed by that soft wailing. Slepnik couldn't stop himself. We made our way to the cemetery, to the overturned headstone and the overgrown lot. I tapped the ground, looked at this creature, and said it as simple as I could. "Here," I said. "Father." Perhaps it understood me. Perhaps it didn't. But it could rip out handfuls of dirt like it was nothing, and it did. It took a long time, but not as long as it should have. My dad had not been buried deep or well. Just as nobody had cared for his funeral, nobody had cared about his resting place. It didn't take long for Slepnik to make his way down, and as his hands hit the casket, I looked down to a curious sight. You see, my father had died poor, so poor that they hadn't put much effort into his casket. It was more like a box and the lid looked familiar. And looking a little closer, I realized that it was a door, the actual front door of our house. They had just thrown it on and called it a day. Slepnik stroked the door with his long fingers, his wail slowing to a hum. He had finally found the right door, the one that he had been looking for. I'll never forget that image for as long as I live. An ungodly creature breaking open the casket lid, pushing away a bed of dry blue sunflowers, lifting a long-forgotten corpse from its resting place, cradling it like a mother calming a crying child, its wailing turning to a quiet sob. "Ta-ta," he cried. "Ta-ta." Slepnik wandered off into the night, past the men with guns and those hunkering down in their houses. He did not care. Maybe he had never cared. Maybe he had just been angry that he couldn't find the right door. But as the chaos settled, there would be no need to hide your doors any longer. Slepnik was gone. I sold my father's property, but I kept the photo albums. His name is still spoken like a curse, but at least there's nothing to keep that curse alive. There have been no more sightings of Slepnik as far as I know. The locals didn't want to point fingers at the devil when they called the authorities. Some tried, but it's easier to convince people of a killer rather than a monster. There were questions around the countryside, but as with most things, it was left in an open-ended folder in an office somewhere, unsolved and deprioritized. I returned to Warzawa. It might not be my home, but home is not just a place, it's a time, and that time is long past. It has taken some effort to accept that for now. I might not have a real home, but that doesn't mean that I'll never have one. Much like Slepnik, I think there is a struggle in finding someplace that you belong. But over the southern countryside, the forest lies still. There is no wailing, no knocking, no screaming. And I think that somewhere beyond the trees, anyone can find a place to call home. Leon Knott, Meat Gasher, Rain, That One Woodsman, Army of Meerkats, Santos Adrian, SWAT, Ty Can't Play, Raphael, Smiling Cat, Dragon Slayer 048, Die Screaming, Nelson Asada, Sanjay Anthem, Dalamagara, Jimmy Griffin, Caden Gibbler, Malcolm Black, Damon McCory, Sleepy Shroomy, Big Country Allen, Dino, Mark Norman, Miss Eldridge, Kathy McGuire, MP Massacre 91, Justin Fotenauer, Takio Zorilla, Deggy, Goonology,